Hello, I'm Dr. Ronald W. Satz, founder and chair of the International Society of Unified Science. This is my paper, The Case Against Modern Physics. Abstract. With the development of the reciprocal system of physical theory by D.B. Larson, there exists a viable alternative to modern physics. However, many scientists refuse to consider this alternative paradigm because they think nothing is essentially wrong with the current paradigm. Before they will even take a look at the reciprocal system, they have to be persuaded that much of modern physics is indeed invalid. This paper summarizes the critique of modern physics made by proponents of the reciprocal system beginning in 1959 and continuing to the present. The paper contrasts the conventional physical concepts with those from the reciprocal system to show just how illogical and irrational the accepted concepts are. It does not question the mathematics of the current paradigm. It questions the physical concepts underlying the mathematics. Correct physical concepts must come before the mathematics if we wish to obtain the correct physical answers. If the physical concepts are wrong, then no matter how precise or elegant the mathematics, the theory is wrong. Criticism in science is just as important as criticism in philosophy. The rank-and-file scientists and professors are too trusting of the proclamations and pronouncements of the leading conventional theoreticians and the authors of textbooks. It's time for the rank-and-file to look more critically at existing theories and discard those that are in violation of reason. It is also time for the government to stop funding and propping up big science, except of course for military research. Government control of science makes it very difficult for competing theories to be considered. With the decks cleared of the nonsense, the way is made open for study and eventual acceptance of the reciprocal system, a fully rational, unified and general theory of the universe. In a course on the reciprocal system, based on the author's papers, this paper should be studied first. Introduction and Literature Review. Before beginning the development of a new physical theory, it is incumbent upon the theoretician to have a thorough knowledge of current and previous theories, so as not to repeat past mistakes. And even more importantly, the theoretician must have a thorough grasp of the relevant physical facts from observations and experiments. In 1930, D.B. Larson began his project to calculate the physical properties of matter solely from chemical composition and molecular structure. His first major step was to make a detailed study of the properties of thousands of different substances. The second major step was to formulate more accurate and more universally applicable physical concepts and mathematical expressions to represent these properties. His third major step was to deduce the values of the properties from these expressions and compare the results with other data. Note the sequence here: inductive reasoning, then deductive reasoning. This work ultimately culminated in Reference 1, Larson's first book, which is entitled The Structure of the Physical Universe, published in 1959. Larson's key discovery is that space and time have a reciprocal relationship in motion, not just mathematically, but conceptually as well. No previous scientific theory had contained this concept. The only predecessor to Larson's work is Professor Samuel Alexander's masterpiece, Space, Time, and Deity, reference 24. But this is a work of philosophy, not science. What Larson did, in effect, is transform Alexander's space-time theory from a philosophy to a science, and hence make it testable. Larson continued to work on the reciprocal system for many years thereafter, producing references 2 to 9. The present author summarized Larson's criticism of existing theory and summarized the reciprocal system of theory in reference 10. With a conceptual foundation secure, work then began on making the theory computational and easy to use by engineers. This has been the focus of the present author in the decades since the publishing reference 10, and has culminated in his group of MathCAD papers listed in references 11 through 22. Please note the sequence here: philosophy to science to engineering. The data come first, then the philosophical concepts, then the scientific concepts, then the mathematics, and then finally the applications, including the reciprocal system database, currently a work in progress. And by the way, I do have the microcosmos database is now available from Amazon.com and my website transpower.wordpress.com, as you can see at the lower left. Work on the macrocosmos has now begun. The reciprocal system database carries out the computations of the properties of matter automatically. Reference 1 to reference 22 contain detailed critiques of conventional theory intermixed with a presentation of the reciprocal system of theory. For the convenience of newcomers to the reciprocal system, and especially for those taking a course on the theory, the present author has consolidated and organized his criticism in the sections of the paper which follow. After studying this paper, the reader should be able to peruse reference 1 through reference 22 with considerably greater understanding. Note, unlike nearly all of our competitors in theoretical physics, none of us involved in work on the reciprocal system have taken any taxpayer money. All work has been supported by private, not public means. Number 1, logic. The scientific method involves inductive reasoning from previous experiments and observations to form a hypothesis, and then deductive reasoning from the hypothesis to come to conclusions which can be tested with new or other data. But this procedure, sometimes called Newtonian in honor of Isaac Newton, has been overthrown with the rise of modern physics. Now the procedure is to invent hypotheses and see if there's any correlation with experience. And instead of theories, we have models. But wait, it gets worse. Deductive reasoning has even been thrown out in some situations, particularly in those involving quantum mechanics. Echoing the criticism of quantum mechanics made by proponents of the reciprocal system over many decades, philosopher Leonard Peikoff says this: Since subatomic entities are vague, predictions in this realm can never be certain. They can have only a degree of probability. But for the same reason, can science accept Aristotle's law of identity or its corollary law of causality, since these are ways of affirming that entities are the opposite of vague, that they have specific determinate natures. Thus, the other name of the uncertainty principle, which identifies these rejections of Aristotelian metaphysics and of the process of induction based on it, the principle of indeterminacy. In regard to the subatomic world, this principle declares the idea of causal law must be discarded in favor of rule by chance. In contrast with all of this, the reciprocal system utilizes the traditional scientific method and Aristotelian logic, including the law of identity and the law of causality. There is no Heisenberg uncertainty principle in the reciprocal system. Nothing is vague. However, the reciprocal system is not strictly deterministic. If A is the cause of B, not all of the properties of B are necessarily determined by A. Some properties may be determined by chance or by other entities. For example, the energy source for a spherical light bulb causes rays of light to be emitted at a specific frequency or a specific set of frequencies, but the direction of the individual rays is determined by probability. No one direction is favored, so there is a probability distribution of rays over all directions. Technically, the direction of an individual ray is determined by the direction of the progressing space-time unit in which the photon is created. Individual space-time units are moving outward in all directions. Similarly, in calculating the properties of matter, there is a probability distribution on velocities and hence the temperatures of the atoms involved. But there's no violation of causality or identity here. Quantum mechanics and relativity do not work well together. Therefore, either one or both are wrong. Contradictions cannot exist in a logical universe. The conventional theoreticians commonly say that the laws of physics break down under certain circumstances, like inside a black hole. But in a rational universe, there cannot be such a breakdown. The conventional theoreticians also say that singularities or infinities exist. But again, in a rational universe, there cannot be singularities or infinities. Any theory which leads to these is wrong. 2. Fundamental component of the universe. The most important task in theoretical physics is ascertaining the fundamental component of the universe. The materialists first said that it was atoms, and then they said it was subatoms after these were discovered. But in the 20th century, the detection of hundreds of particles with masses less than the proton threw this idea into confusion. So then the conventional theorists came up with quarks or strings as the fundamental component. Now, mind you, there is no hard evidence of such entities. The quarks are alleged to have fractional charges, but no one has ever observed such. So-called gluons are supposed to keep the quarks together and thus unobservable. Strings are even stranger. They are supposed to vibrate in hidden space dimensions, maybe 9 or maybe 11 total. Really? Where's the evidence? These are inventive, not inductive theories. To the conventional elementary particle or quark or string theorists, space-time is just the setting or background for matter, however defined. It isn't absolute, it's purely relational. However, by simple inspection, we can see that space-time must come before matter. After all, doesn't matter exist in coordinate space and in clock time? How could matter possibly come first? But wait, there's more. Matter can be changed into non-matter, so how can matter be fundamental? For instance, a charged electron and a charged positron, two material particles, can combine to form two gamma rays which move outward in opposite directions. Radiation is not matter. Similarly, two gamma ray photons can combine to form an electron-positron pair. Thus something must underlie both radiation and matter, and this is space-time, or motion in the most general sense, the true fundamental component of the universe. This concept was first recognized in a philosophical manner by Professor Alexander, in reference 24, Space-Time and Deity, and then in a scientific manner by Larson, reference 1, Structure of the Physical Universe. The postulates of the reciprocal system are given in the appendix. Note, some theoreticians start with energy as the fundamental component of the universe. But the problem here is that energy is a purely scalar quantity, whereas space-time or motion can be a scalar quantity or a vectorial quantity. Simple observation shows that we need to have a fundamental entity which can be scalar or vectorial as necessary. 3. Space-time. If space-time is the fundamental component of the universe, then the dimensions of all physical quantities must be expressed in terms of space s and time t only, along with auxiliary units such as radians, steradians, cycles, and revolutions, of course. See reference 11. Also, if space-time is the fundamental component, then it must be absolute, and not purely relative or relational. But conventional theorists assume the primacy of matter, whether it's elementary particles or quarks or strings, and so space-time is relative or relational and not absolute in these theories. Mass and electric charge are unanalyzable in these systems, which certainly does not help with physical understanding. In special relativity, only the speed of light is taken as an absolute. This implies that the space and time in which this speed is composed must be absolute as well, in contradiction to the premises of the theory. Of course, any given motion can be taken as relative to a fixed coordinate system, which itself is moving relative to another reference system. But ultimately, there must be some total value of the motion which represents an absolute quantity. There cannot be infinite regress. See reference 19 for a discussion of special relativity and the reciprocal system. Mathematically, space and time are known to be reciprocal in motion. More space equals less time. Larson generalized this conclusion. Space and time are reciprocally related, both mathematically and conceptually. Reciprocal quantities must have the same properties, except that one is the numerator of the ratio of the two, and one is the denominator. So if space can have a maximum of 3 dimensions, then time can have a maximum of 3 dimensions. If time can progress, then space can progress. This contrasts with the conventional theory, which posits that space has 3 dimensions but time has only 1 dimension, and that time progresses but space does not. Of course, in some theories, space progresses, as in the Big Bang. And in other theories, space has more than 3 dimensions. But by Occam's razor, we should not theorize more dimensions than are needed to actually explain the physical reality. Relativity theory posits that space-time is a 4-dimensional continuum. But if we start with space-time as fundamental, then space and time must have discrete units. Otherwise, how could we deduce the dimensional values of various physical quantities? Therefore, the reciprocal system posits 3 dimensions of space-time in discrete, absolute units, and space cannot exist without time, and time cannot exist without space. The reality is space-time only. String theory posits that there are 9, 11, or whatever number of space dimensions, but offers no proof. The dimensions are alleged to be hidden. String theory is just another one of those inventive theories which have little, if anything, to do with actual physical reality. We observe only 3 dimensions of space. We observe only 1 dimension of time. But we can extrapolate that time has really 3 dimensions, which may be observed under some circumstances. Similarly, we observe that time progresses, so we extrapolate that space progresses. And in fact, we observe that distant galaxies move away from one another. The so-called dark energy is simply the space-time progression. 4. Photons and radiation. In a space-time universe, photons must be some form of motion. Our reciprocal system says that a photon is a linear vibration existing within a perpendicularly progressing space-time unit. The result of this compound motion is a sine curve. See Figure 4 of Reference 10, which is my unmysterious universe. This contrasts with confusion of the conventional theories. Is radiation comprised of waves or particles? Sometimes radiation acts as a wave, and sometimes it acts as a stream of particles. The reciprocal system explains this perfectly, whereas the conventional theories do not. They tell us that we must live with this wave-particle duality. No, we don't. The photon travels as a wave because of the space-time progression. The photon acts as a particle because it is, indeed, a discrete unit, a linear vibration. But what about the double-slit experiment, where it seems that a photon can be in 2 different places at once? The compound motion of the photon easily explains this conundrum of conventional physics. By logic, a photon can, of course, go through only one or the other of the 2 slits. However, the slit disturbs the photon so that it hops onto another progressing space-time unit, thus changing direction. This completely accounts for the observed dispersion of the photons on the target screen. Another shibboleth of conventional theory is that radiation is electromagnetic. The vibrations supposedly represent an electric field and a perpendicular magnetic field. Actually, there's no evidence for this. No one has ever observed electric or magnetic effects from photons by themselves. Of course, if a material surface is bombarded by photons of sufficient frequency, we observe the photoelectric effect. Here the photons, linear vibrations, are transformed to electric charges, rotational vibrations, of originally uncharged electrons, and these newly charged electrons may then escape from the material. Physical and geometric optics have been derived from experience, and the reciprocal system has no disagreement with these subjects. 5. Subatoms. In the reciprocal system, the space-time progression is a linear or translational motion. Photons are linear vibrations, moving as waves due to the perpendicular space-time progression. The next type of motion is rotation. Rotational motion, or spin, applied to a photon creates a subatom. Reference 1, 6, 10, 13, and 19 discuss the details. All subatoms are rotating photons. The quark and string theorists posit that subatoms are a certain number and arrangement of quarks or strings. But we have observed neither. Besides, what is a quark? What is a string? They are unanalyzable in these theories. We do observe photons, however, so why wouldn't it be possible that they could be set spinning? And what about electric charges? Conventional theory says that they are unanalyzable. But in the reciprocal system, all physical phenomena are motions or relations of motions. So electric charges must be some form of motion. Indeed, they are one-dimensional rotational vibrations, the details of which are given in the references. Chargeless particles come before charged particles. Charges represent an additional motion to the bare particles. Would you rather have a theory which explains what charges are, or would you rather have a theory which says they are unanalyzable? Conventional theory fails to explain why there are hundreds of elementary particles. According to the reciprocal system, most of these are really cosmic or inverse atoms. The cosmic sector of the universe is exactly like our material sector, except that space and time are interchanged. The masses of cosmic atoms are therefore the inverse of the masses of the corresponding material atoms. There is a periodic table of the cosmic elements, just like there is one for our material elements. This explains why there are so many elementary particles with a mass less than that of the proton, but more than that of a charged electron or positron, the mesons. 6. Atoms. Conventional theorists still preach the nuclear theory of the atom, despite Larson's total refutation of it many years ago in reference 4 of the case against the nuclear atom. Here are the main points of the reciprocal system critique. A. The charged electrons supposedly in orbit around the nucleus should of course spiral into the nucleus and neutralize the charges on the protons. Bohr merely hypothesized this problem away. B. The protons in the nucleus should of course repel one another. The nuclear theorists posit a strong nuclear force which supposedly keeps the protons together. This force is alleged to be mediated by mesons, but no one has found a meson current. The nuclear force has no other purpose. Therefore, it is purely ad hoc, just like the demon forces held by our ancient ancestors. C. The neutrons somehow become stable inside the nucleus, whereas they are unstable outside with a half-life of approximately 12 or 13 minutes or so. So how would a neutron become stable inside the nucleus? D. The velocities and positions of the electrons are said to be indeterminate. Electrons may jump from orbit to orbit without going through the intervening distance. Such statements are obviously illogical and contrary to reason. The reciprocal system has a much better explanation for the spectral lines. See reference 14. E. Applying pressure to a solid decreases the interatomic distance if the atoms are in contact, as conventionally supposed. This would mean that the electronic orbits would have to be continuously moved inward, contrary to the quantization supposed by the theory. F. In the scattering experiments, Rutherford used only alpha particles, not neutralized alpha particles. Had he used neutralized alpha particles, he would have discovered that the scattering of these would be very similar to that of the normal alpha particles, which means that electrical force could not be the cause of the scattering. See reference 12. The basic forces of matter are not electrical. G. A particular uranium isotope is alleged to have 92 electrons, 92 protons, and 146 neutrons. Really? Just how could all these particles actually work together? In the reciprocal system, the atom is not comprised of subatoms. Rather, it is a single integral unit. Whereas a subatom has one rotating photon, an atom has two. The The orthogonal photons have quantized spins around the three perpendicular axes. Under appropriate circumstances, the atom can take in additional motions or give up some of its existing motions. For the details, see reference 1 through 22. Also see the periodic table at transpower.wordpress.com. 7. Atomic bonding. In conventional theory, electrons somehow cause atoms to bond. In ionic bonding, one atom supposedly gives up an electron or electrons, and the other atom takes in the electron or electrons. In covalent bonding, the electrons are shared between or among the atoms. Really? These same electrons are supposed to give the atoms their structure and their spectral lines, and now they also have to bind the atoms together electrically? But it's obvious from the studies of interatomic distance that two forces are necessary, one attractive and one repulsive. The electrical theory of matter bonding provides only an attractive force. Besides, the gyrations required of the hypothetical electrons are impossible for any actual particles. In metals, these same electrons are alleged to be free to move translationally so as to explain electric and thermal currents. They sure are busy doing that and keeping metallic atoms together. How on earth could such particles do so much? In the reciprocal system, in the region outside unit space, the space-time progression is, in effect, an outward force, moving atoms away from each other. Gravitation is the opposite. It is an inward force. In the region inside unit space, the domain of solids, the two forces invert. The space-time progression becomes a force of cohesion, whereas the gravitational force becomes a force of repulsion. The natural result is an equilibrium interatomic distance inside unit space. If an outside pressure is applied to the solid, this adds to the space-time progression inward in this region, and the atoms move closer together. If heat is applied to the solid, this adds to the gravitational force outward in this region, and the solid expands. In the reciprocal system, matter is neutral. Not because there is an equal number of positive and negative charges. Rather, matter is neutral because the atoms are not normally charged. Yes, there are electrons in ordinary matter, but these are usually chargeless and massless. On average, there is one massless chargeless electron per atom. In contrast with quantum mechanics, the reciprocal system has a complete set of interatomic distance calculations. See reference 2 for the details. The reciprocal system also has a complete set of calculations for the fluid properties of matter. See reference 20. There is nothing corresponding to this in quantum mechanics. Engineers have to make do with empirical regression equations, such as those in reference 23, which is Professor Colliar's handbook of chemical properties. 8. Gravitation. General relativity and similar theories posit that gravitation is caused by a deformation or warping of space. They say that space is non-Euclidean. But all of the sky surveys of recent years have shown that space is Euclidean, just as the reciprocal system says. Quoting from reference 10, which is my book, The Unmysterious Universe, page 10. No truly authentic evidence exists of 1. A finite propagation of the gravitational effect, 2. A deformation of space, 3. A medium of any kind through which the gravitational effect could be propagated, 4. Medium-like properties of space, 5. Infinite effectiveness throughout space with the gravitational effect, 6. Gravitational waves, and 7. Gravitons. The situation has not changed since reference 10 was published, but a tremendous amount of manpower and money have been wasted trying to find the non-existent gravitational waves and gravitons. In the reciprocal system, the same rotational motion which gives the atom its shape and mass also causes it to move inward in opposition to the space-time progression in the region outside unit space. The basic motions are all scalar. So a scalar rotational motion is equivalent to a scalar translational motion. The gravitational force is therefore not propagated at all, and space is not curved. For the details, see reference 1, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, 15, and 21. Note, inertial mass exactly equals gravitational mass. So to this extent, and to this extent only, we can agree with general relativity's principle of equivalence. 9. Electric current and thermal current. Conventional theory says that the electric current is a flow of charged electrons. But if this were the case, the electrons would repel themselves to the surface of the conductor and possibly leave the conductor. Resistivity is known to be proportional to the cross-sectional area of the conductor, and this proves that the flow must be distributed through the conductor, not along the surface. The conventional theory also says that a conductor raised to a high potential at one end is the same as that of an object with a substantial static charge at that end. But there is no evidence of this. Conductors are neutral. As for solid heat flow, conventional theory says that phonons, supposed to be quantums of vibration of the crystal lattice, transport the energy, as well as charged electrons and metals. Really? Has anyone ever seen a phonon? The reciprocal system says that electric current and thermal current are flows of uncharged electrons. The electric current is unidirectional, whereas thermal current loops back within the same conductor, therefore negating any electrical effects. These uncharged electrons move through the atoms of the conductor, which naturally resist the motion above the superconducting temperature. See reference 17 and 18 for a thorough treatment of electric and thermal resistivity in the reciprocal system. That concludes part 1 of this paper. There are 2 parts. Please watch part 2.